Well, if there's one thing Masters of the Universe fans can agree on, is that the toy line was always about heads. Okay, no, actually it wasn't. They were squishable back in the day. But for classics, heads and swappable heads played a big part, and that was because, well, we wanted to distinguish classics as clearly an adult collector line. That's why very early on, lots of the Year One figures included a second head. Man-at-Arms had mustache and no mustache to go with the old Filmation look versus the old toy look. I think the best one was probably Merman, having both his classic toy look and the art on the card back, which did not reflect the original figure. So getting the second head really added value. So with so much excitement over heads, it's amazing it took so long before we actually got to a actual pack of heads in the line. And, well, it makes an interesting story. I've actually been looking forward to doing this director's commentary. So let's look at what this pack is all about. Essentially, it offers 2000X interpretations of the characters in their head, the portrait sculpt, so that you could swap them out onto the previous figure. So if you already owned Buzz-Off, well, now you had Buzz-Off in more of a 2000X head. That's the one on the left there, with the longer antennae, versus the classic vintage head that came on the figure. For Clawful, a lot of fans welcomed a version that didn't have Muppet-esque eyebrows. So yeah, and even if you're a fan of the dad from American Pie, maybe not so much on your figure. Roboto got a bit of a different look, and this one was more of a challenge, since Roboto's body was very different in his vintage look versus 2000X, and therefore the same as the head. Grizzlor has a whole story behind it, and I'll get to that, how it used to be a swappable faceplate and had to get changed into an actual head. And then, of course, Snout Spout, I think, is one of the best upgrades because, well, the original head was made of foam and broke if you bent it too hard. So at least this was a non-bendable version. So that's an overview of who you were getting. Of course, Cyclone, too. He was the first one. I didn't mention him by name. And this was their very much 2000X look. Now, there were figures that, like Whiplash, that had a 2000X head. But this was actually an error. He was not supposed to have this head. It kind of got added to the figure so late in the game, and it went to tooling. So why is this? When the show was such a hit for collectors, not so much for Mattel. And one of the problems was, as I said, the body shapes were a little bit different. So 2000X heads on a Classics body kind of worked, and that was one of the reasons we were actually hesitant to do it. But we were determined to find a way, and we knew the Horsemen would be able to do that because they're amazing sculptors. But yes, we knew it would be a challenge. A character with a spindly body like Buzz-Off in 2000X, when you're putting a spindly head on a buffed up body, because Classics more buff than 2000X because they imitated the vintage line, there's a little bit of a wonkiness. But the bigger issue was that Mattel management didn't want to be constantly reminded of their last failure. The 2000X line, as a show, as a toy line, as a relaunch, was a colossal failure. For collectors, it was awesome. We loved it. But for the company and the bottom line, not so much. It wound up losing huge amounts of money, and honestly, management didn't want to be reminded of this. So if we were going to do a new Masters line, one of the edicts was to avoid them looking like the 2000X characters. We could kind of throw in some accessories, some weapons, but doing a full head like Whiplash got was off the table. Until, as usually happens every couple of years with every major Fortune 500 company, there is a leadership change, and once management was in place that had no connection to the 2000X series, they could care less what we did. So we finally got to do 2000X heads. That was basically what it came down to. We knew the Horsemen could figure out the aesthetic issue between spindly or oversized bodies to make it mesh as best possible, but now that new management who weren't emotionally connected to the failure of the 2000X show, we could go forward. Now, the Buzz-Off head, this was actually sculpted at the time of Buzz-Off. I kept it. It's one of the few things I've kept and got signed out before I left Mattel, but yeah, you can see that's the prototype. I kept it because I didn't know if we were ever going to get to this head pack. The other one that's interesting that was sculpted at the time was the Grizzlor head. All the others were sculpted new for the pack. The Grizzlor head was also designed by the Horsemen as a way to get a 2000X look for Grizzlor, but not knowing about that edict that we had from management to stay away from this, they had sculpted the head, and I, being a moron, sent that image into Toy Fair magazine. And so an image with the second faceplate was shown, and I was like, no, shoot, that's not going to be included in the figure, and it's not in any of our internal or our publicity. It only shows the classic head. I totally screwed up sending that image in. So, yeah, but, it's not the end of the world. And I'm glad we actually got that faceplate head out there eventually to make up for this. As I noted, originally it was meant to be, or the way the Horseman designed it, if it was going to come with the figure the way Whiplash did, it would have been a swappable faceplate. So you would, kind of like the Hoth Trooper and Black series, I think it has like, two different faces. There was a peg system, and you would get one head, but two different faceplates that you'd be able to swap. So here you can see it underneath it, same thing. So here I can pop it off for you and then pop on the new one. This was another item like Buzz-Off's head that I signed out before I left Mattel because I was like, I know I want that Grizzlor because it's unique. All right, so that's how it works. So the head plates would swap. Oops, I didn't get it in all the way, but you get what I mean. All right, you can see what the peg is. So I just wasn't pressing hard enough. So again, you can see it's the prototype because it's got that silver peg there, not made of plastic, it's made of metal because it's a prototype. And so that's why when the new team showed the heads pack, they showed a plate because they didn't realize once we eliminated the second head plate, they just had one head. So they had to actually offer you a full Grizzlor head. Originally, the pack was going to have a plate because the new team that came along weren't as knowledgeable historically with the line and didn't know originally they were plates, but then it got canceled. So they had to do a last-minute change, and that's why a plate was shown, but what was actually in the pack was a full Grizzlor head with all the hair, because since the figure wound up not being able to remove the plate, you had to give him a second head to make it work. And there you go. That's it. So some of the heads work well, others not so much. I think Roboto looks a little odd because of the body, but hey, no matter what, you came out ahead.